Jude Matulich-Hall, and this is Titles, Talk, and Tipples. My guest today, I'm so excited to be with, is Shawn A. Cosby, author of Blacktop, Wasteland, which has hit best of and must-read lists like the New York Times, BuzzFeed, and even Time Magazine, as well as Brotherhood of the Blade and My Darkest Prayer. Welcome, Shawn. Thank you for coming.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. Yeah. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And so what are we drinking tonight, or this lovely evening?
We are drinking it's a well-known Irish whiskey that is a personal favorite of mine. It's not one of the more expensive ones, the more reasonable ones. And they had a really great series of commercials a couple of years ago. So that gives anybody a hint.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah, so cheers to that.
Cheers. Yeah. Cheers.
Same glass. There you go.
There you go. We don't use name brands on this show, so you're just going to have to guess what we're drinking.
Gotcha.
It's really delicious for a low cost whiskey. It's almost dangerous. It's so delicious.
It's one of those whiskeys that it starts out, you tell people you love them, and then by the end of the bottle you tell people the truth. So
what you really think of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
So we're gonna embark on a journey into imagery this evening, and I chose that topic because listening to you read, I just would pause. I'd have to hit pause and just think about some of the imagery you've used in some stories. And I've read through some stuff. I haven't quite finished a novel, but I scanned the beginnings of the ones I've listed. And I just love your imagery. It's fantastic. You really pull people right into your stories. So
thank you.
Yeah. So I kind of try to use imagery too. And sometimes putting this stuff into words is kind of difficult. But what are some of the things you have to say about where you get your ideas from with imagery? What do you do to delve into it?
I like using conflicting images. I like using, like, if I'm describing something soft, I'll use something, I'll reconfigure a word that is usually used to describe something rough, or I'll use contrasting imagery to get a point across. If I'm working on something right now, and I described magnolia, the blooms of a magnolia tree as fleshy clouds. You know, those are two contrasting things, flesh and clouds. But I wanted to give the reader that tactile sensation of what, if you've never seen a magnolia bloom before, they feel almost like flesh, but they're, these huge white, a magnolia bloom is about the size of my fist. So I like using that kind of imagery, contrasting two things to create an image. I also like sensory imagery. I like to talk about, the five senses. So what my characters see, what something smells like, what something feels like, how it feels to touch it, maybe even how it feels to breathe it or hear it. I use a lot of that. I lean into that a lot. And also, I like a good simile. Maybe I like them too much. And so, there's a line in the beginning of Blacktop Wasteland where I'm describing the engine. I'm describing the engine of the car, and I said it sounds like a pack of lions. And things like that. I like to try to put people in the place by a tactile response. So that's my main thing. That's what I do a lot. And I think I do it naturally just because that's the way I just think. There are times where I do sit down and really work on it. And I'm drawing back to animal comparisons a lot. I like to compare inanimate objects to animals. The car sounds like lions.
Yeah.
A gun is like a coiled snake, things like that. So I do that a lot. And then that's not original to me. I stole that from way better writers. But yeah, that's usually where I get my imagery from. It's like with the titles of my books. I like to use iconoclastic words that don't necessarily go together, and like Blacktop, Wasteland, or I have a novel, My Darkest Prayer, or like my book that comes out in July. I have a book coming out in July called I don't know if you can see it, called Razor Blade Tears, and,
I tried
and so using that kind of and so using that kind of contrarian imagery, forcing two things together, I think makes hopefully, I should say, makes the writing a little bit more memorable.
Yeah, definitely, because it makes the reader's mind think. Like, it's I don't know. I love that kind of stuff. I don't mind. I don't read super duper fast. It's not like I start a book and then I, as fast as I can, get to the end. I really like to digest what I'm reading, and that kind of imagery completely helps to just kind of be in the story. It brings things to life, and like using living creatures to compare inanimate objects to breathes life into the story. And I love that. And I really liked, I was actually, I'm going to give you a quiz later, but one of the questions on there, I already have to cut because you said it was the motors, the engines roaring like lions. And then it turns to dragons. The lions turn into dragons. I really love that.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And the using all the senses, I think, is super important with writing. And we use our imagination a lot. A lot of this we're not experiencing ourselves, so we don't know what clouds really feel like, and etc. But just imagining what something smells like, tastes like, feels like, and then putting a twist on it, because it gets kind of mundane if you don't jazz it up a bit with other things.
Well, yeah, and I think it also is a issue, a question of contextuality. Like, if you're writing an action thriller, or which is what I usually write, crime, but there's a lot of action in them. You really want to put the reader in the moment. Like if I'm writing a story, or I'm writing a section in a book that's more emotional, I'll cut back on the sensory similes and stuff like that, because I really want the reader to focus on the dialogue. Like if I'm having a scene where two characters are talking about something really serious, then I kind of like to force everything else out and just have the reader focus on the way they're talking to each other. Yeah. So I don't use a lot of descriptive imagery in those moments. But then if we're having a fight or the chase scene or a shootout or something like that, then I ramp it up, because I really want to put the person in the moment. So I want you to feel, the shards of glass breaking in the car window. I want you to hear, the sound of bone breaking. I want you to feel, what it feels. I want you to imagine what it feels like to feel somebody's knuckles graze against your teeth. And so, to me, that it's all a part of this huge pie that you're trying to make when you're writing. But I think, at the same time, you don't want to overdo it. And I think some people do. And it's just that's a learning curve. You learn. And the more you write, the more you'll understand that when to take your foot off the pedal a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So, sorry, my Brotherhood of the Blade. Was that your first novel?
That was my first book. Okay. That was a book I wrote. I worked on that with. There's a group of writers here in Virginia called Haddon Cross Steampunk Press, or HCS for short. And it was like a cooperative thing, like a community publishing group. We helped each other out. We edited each other's manuscripts. One of the guys, Dave Lee, who founded it, he did all the cover work. And so it was sort of a thing. It was sort of a self-publishing thing, but it was also sort of a community group of artists and writers working together to get stuff published. And that came out, and that was my first full-length book. And that was, that's very different than what I write today. It's a fantasy, urban fantasy. I really enjoyed writing it. I liked it, but it didn't really get any traction. I sort of moved on to a different genre. Not because I don't like that job. I'd love to return to fan. I still like to write fantasy and stuff, but I found a stronger connection with crime fiction, a connection I didn't anticipate. I didn't think that would happen, and but it did. And it's just sort of one of the things that kind of clicked for me. And I'll tell you a funny story. So the way I got into writing, I've always loved reading crime fiction, but the way I got into writing crime fiction, I had a friend who was a performer. She's a ballet dancer. And she went to New York City, and after her performance, her and her troupe went to this bar over on Sullivan Street in New York, in Manhattan, in the Village. And she got to talking to the bartender, and it happens that the bartender was a guy named Todd Robinson, who used to publish really hardcore noir crime magazine called Thug Lit. And he was telling her, he's like, "Oh, I need writers for my magazine. You should." And she was like, "Well, I got a friend that's a writer," because it was after Brotherhood of the Blade came out. And when she came home, she's like, "You should send him a story." I didn't write crime fiction because I didn't know how to write stories that took place in the area that I live in. I'm from a small town, and I wanted to write stories about that, but I didn't know how. And then I read a couple books that were about small town crime. Daniel Woodrell's Winter's Bone, a book by Clay Reynolds called Agatite. And so I was able to read these books, and I was like, okay, I can do this. I think I'll try. Yeah. And so I wrote this short story, and I sent it in, and it got published. And that was when I really, like, everything just clicked. Yeah. Like, this is what I'm supposed to be writing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. When I'm in a different genre, but when I first started writing, I wanted to write a mystery. And I realized mysteries are really hard to write because you have to create, you have to create the red herring without being too obvious that's the trick, is like, you have to trick your audience into following one answer and then spring it on and not have it be too obvious, or the, Dusa Machina kind of, oh yeah, the investigator just figured it out, And so I'd started, and I got stuck on page 50. Like, that's as far as I got. It took me like a year to write to page 50. And then it was like, I don't know where to go from here. And my child got into steampunk and more fantastical stuff. And I was like, oh, I really like that. So, because he was interested, I got interested. And I realized suddenly my story started really taking shape in my head after being introduced to this. I mean, it's not a new world, but it was a new world to me, steampunk. And it only just fell into place. So it's really great when something falls into place like that. It just clicks with your brain.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
So I was mentioning that I was guessing that Brotherhood of the Blade was your first book, because there is such a difference between Brotherhood of the Blade and Blacktop, Wasteland. And, you could just see the maturity that happens. And I'm sure that happens for lots of writers, is just how you kind of you figure out how you write yourself, And it's really cool how that
yeah. Well, I think with Blacktop, I realize the things that I like. Even when I write fantasy, I'm writing from a point of view of talking about people on the margins, people in desperate situations. And so, even when I try to write fantasy and horror or sci-fi, whatever, it was always about those types of characters. And so I realized, okay, this is my niche. This is what works for me. But part of that growth and maturity is being able to accept constructive criticism. And I mean constructive criticism, not just criticism, because some people just criticize you just for the hell of it, just for the fun of it. It's like they get up in the morning and it's like they brush their teeth and they criticize somebody. But people who actually will give me constructive criticism, like I mentioned Todd Robson before, and there's other people that were editors in magazines and anthologies that I submitted to that really gave me constructive criticism about what to work on. And so it was a work in progress. But I always say, somebody can teach you like the mechanics of writing. Like they can teach you grammar, they can teach you verb, subject agreement, spelling. They can teach you, how to write to a standardized form. But nobody can teach you how to be a storyteller.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody can teach you how to be a storyteller. You either are or you aren't. And so for me, I feel like luckily, I think I am a storyteller. And I'm just blown away that people have connected and have, as I've tried to get better and try to be a better writer, I think I've gotten better at how I tell stories. And so it's just remarkable to me how many people have connected with it.
Yeah. So how did you get into writing? This isn't really an interview, but I'm going to be asking you questions anyway,
Oh, no, you're fine.
But
so
how old were you when you got into writing? Was that something you've always done, or was it later?
Yeah. So I always was a big reader. I've always been a big reader. I love reading. I don't get as much time to read as I used to, but I still love reading. And what would happen was when I was like 7 or 8, I used to complain about some of the books, not all of them, some of the books I would read. And I would tell my mom, like, oh, I don't like the way this ended, or this was a dumb ending, or I don't know why they did that. And my mom was like, you should probably just write your own stories. Try writing your own stories. It's not as easy as it looks. And so I was like, all right, I'll try that. And so I started, of course, the 7 or 8 is just, the stories about the superhuman robot dinosaur and stuff like that. But when I was about 14 or 15, I met a teacher named Jeff Bone. He was my English teacher in high school. And he really took an interest in my writing and really gave me like an education outside of just what was on the high school syllabus about writing. He gave me books on writing. He suggested authors that I should read. And that was where I really felt like, wow, this is something I might be able to do. But it was a long time. I mean, I started writing seriously. I started sending out stories when I was 19.
Oh, wow.
I didn't get my first acceptance. Yeah, I didn't get my first acceptance for a short story until I was 29. So 10 years of rejections. Wow. And then it was another, 7 or 8 years before I got my first book published with Blacktop, with Razor Blade, Brother of the Blade. And then it was another 3 years until my first detective novel, My Darkest Prayer, was published. Cool. But, it was one of the things where I didn't give up because it was a lot of discouragement, a lot of rejections. Oh my God. I could have papered a house with the rejection letters I got. Oh, wow. But I just loved writing so much, and I was kind of stubborn. And I was like, you know what? Even if I never get published, I like writing. So I'm just going to keep writing and keep submitting stories. And, eventually somebody's got to say yes. Because I knew deep down inside, I wasn't a bad writer. I didn't think I was a great writer, but I knew I wasn't a bad writer because I've read bad writing. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. So, but anyway, that's where it came from. And it's all I've always wanted to, even when I'm not writing, I love telling stories. If back in the days before the pandemic, I would go to a lot of conventions, writing conventions. I love sitting in a bar and talking and telling stories and kind of just being like that rock on tour. And so, it's just something that it's always appealed to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I started writing when I was probably I think in junior high. I wasn't that old when I started writing, but then I stopped after college, and then I had a whole novel in my head when it did come back.
Right.
It was fun getting all that out. It took me a long time though, because it's like an exercise, it takes a while, like weightlifting or something it's like your brain weightlifting.
Oh yeah.
You start writing again, and it gets easier as you go along, and it gets stronger, and it's really
Exactly.